The bar was called the Drifting Comet, and it sat at the bottom of the entertainment ring like something the station had tried to forget about. The sign above the door flickered between two languages, neither of them human, and the door itself had a dent in it that looked like someone had been thrown into it from the inside. The walls were dark metal. The lighting was the color of old rust. The floor had stains that no one had bothered to clean, because cleaning them would require admitting what had caused them in the first place. Danny Cole walked in like he was coming home. He pushed through the heavy door, looked around the dim, crowded room, full of aliens twice his size, and nodded slowly with the satisfied expression of a man who had found exactly what he was looking for. The rest of the crew filed in behind him. Meg scanned the room with sharp eyes and picked a curved booth near the back wall, a spot with good sight lines and an easy path to the exit. She did this without thinking about it, the same way she did everything, efficiently and without asking permission. They settled in. The booth was built for Torvan bodies, which meant it was too tall and too wide for humans, but they made it work by sitting close together and propping their feet on things. Hank took up one end. Pete tucked himself into the corner. Cody slid in next to Lori, who immediately began checking a scratch on his arm that he had picked up somewhere in the commerce ring. Danny sat at the outside edge, one arm draped over the back of the seat, watching the room with relaxed attention. The bartender was a four-armed Velhari named Sisk. He had a flat face, no visible expression, and the tired patience of someone who had served drinks to every kind of trouble the galaxy could produce. He came to their table, looked at the 6 humans, and waited. "What do you recommend for first-timers?" Sisk studied him for a long moment. "How durable is your species?" "That depends on who you ask," Danny said. Sisk brought them something called a black void. It was thick, dark purple, and when he set the glasses down on the table, the surface of the liquid did not move. It just sat there, dense and still, like it was waiting. Sisk mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that black void was classified as a mild industrial solvent by Velhari health regulators, and that he was required by station law to inform them of this. Danny picked up his glass, gave it a sniff, and drank half of it in one go. His eyes watered. His face went red. He set the glass down, blinked 3 times, and said, "That is outstanding. Another round, please." The rest of the crew followed. Meg drank hers like medicine, fast and without comment. Hank drained his in one pull, and slammed the glass down hard enough to rattle the table. Pete took a careful sip, considered it, and took another. Lori coughed, laughed, and wiped her eyes. Cody took one sip, choked, and spent the next 30 seconds trying to breathe, while Danny patted him on the back and told him he was doing great. Across the bar, in a dark corner table that had a good view of everything, Counselor Wraith sat down with a glass of filtered water and activated the recording device hidden in his sleeve. He had followed them here. He always followed them. That was his job. But there was something about this crew that made him pay closer attention than usual. They moved through the world differently than other humans he had observed. They were not diplomats or soldiers or scientists. They were just people, ordinary by their own species standards, and yet they occupied every room they entered as though it belonged to them. He watched and he recorded. Over the next hour, the humans did what humans always did. They talked. They laughed at things that were not funny by any rational standard. Danny told the story of the time their engine caught fire during a hyperspace jump. The containment system had failed. The fire suppression system had malfunctioned because Pete had borrowed parts from it to fix the water recycler the week before, and they had been forced to vent the entire cargo bay into space to starve the fire of oxygen. They lost half their shipment, most of their emergency supplies, and Meg's favorite jacket. "It was a good jacket," Meg said, and her voice carried the weight of genuine loss. "We were spinning," Lori added. "The stabilizers were out. I was trying to treat burns on 3 people while floating sideways. I stitched up Hank's arm while holding onto a pipe with my teeth. She did a great job, Hank said, holding up his arm to show a faint scar. Barely crooked. The kind of laughter that came from somewhere deep and real. The kind that shook shoulders and made eyes water. They laughed about nearly dying. They laughed about fire and vacuum and lost cargo, and a jacket that Meg would apparently never stop mourning. Wraith recorded, "The humans are engaging in what appears to be a communal trauma processing ritual. They retell dangerous experiences in a group setting, with each member adding details and corrections, and they respond to these accounts with laughter. This laughter does not match Valhari humor metrics. It does not follow from logical incongruity or social superiority patterns. It appears to serve a bonding function, a way of transforming fear into something shared and therefore manageable. I find it deeply unsettling and cannot explain why." The social expansion began shortly after. Hank noticed a Torvan freight worker sitting alone at the next table. The Torvan was large, quiet, and clearly not looking for company. Hank walked over, sat down across from him without being invited, and challenged him to an arm wrestling match. The Torvan, whose species was known for long silences and careful deliberation, stared at Hank for a full 15 seconds before accepting. Hank lost, badly. The Torvan pinned his arm in under 2 seconds, with an expression of mild surprise, as though he had expected more resistance from a creature who had initiated the challenge with such confidence. Hank laughed, rubbed his shoulder, and bought the Torvan a drink. Within 5 minutes, they were having a conversation about shipping routes, and the Torvan was showing Hank pictures of his offspring on a small holographic display. Pete had drifted to the far end of the bar, where a Draken mercenary was sitting alone, cleaning a piece of equipment that looked like it might be a weapon or might be an engine part. Pete sat down next to him and asked what it was. The Draken, a species not known for patience with smaller beings, looked at Pete with suspicion. Pete looked back with the calm, steady gaze of a man who genuinely wanted to know about the machinery. Something in that simple honesty broke through. Within 10 minutes, they were deep in a conversation about plasma flow regulators and the relative merits of different coolant systems. Cody found 2 alien dock workers near the back of the bar, and somehow convinced them to play a card game he had just invented. He was making up the rules as he went along, and the dock workers did not fully understand what was happening. But Cody's enthusiasm was so infectious that they kept playing anyway. He cheered when they won, hands, and groaned dramatically when he lost. And the dock workers, despite belonging to a species that communicated primarily through color changes in their skin, were clearly having a good time. Lori moved through the bar like sunlight through a window. She complimented people. She asked questions. She listened in a way that made beings who had never spoken to a human before feel as though they had known her for years. A Torvian trader told her about his homeworld. A Valhari technician showed her how the bar's atmospheric system worked. A small, nervous creature from one of the fringe worlds, a species Lori had never seen before, sat next to her and said nothing for 10 minutes. Lori sat with it in comfortable silence, and when it finally got up to leave, it touched her hand briefly with one of its 4 fingers, which Lori later learned was the highest gesture of trust its species could offer. Danny stayed in the booth and watched his crew with the quiet pride of a man who knew exactly what kind of people he had. He drank his Black Void, and he smiled, and he let them do what humans did best, which was reach out across every gap the universe put in front of them, and simply refuse to believe that the gap was real. Wraith watched all of this from his corner. His water sat untouched. His recording device ran continuously. His notes grew longer and more confused with every passing minute. He wrote, "They have been here for 1 standard hour. In that time they have formed social connections with 9 individuals across 4 species." The Torvan freight worker is now showing the large human pictures of his children. The Draken mercenary is laughing. I have never seen a Draken mercenary laugh. The small fringe worlder touched the human medic, which is a bonding gesture that species normally reserves for lifelong companions. These humans did not use bribery, coercion, or political leverage. They simply talked to people. They were interested, they were kind, and somehow, impossibly, it worked. I have been on this station for 6 years, and I have fewer social connections than these humans made in 60 minutes. I am choosing not to examine what this says about me. He paused, looked at his water, and for the first time in a very long career, considered ordering something stronger. He did not, but the fact that he considered it felt significant. The night was young, the bar was full, the humans were happy, and Wraith had the uneasy feeling, the kind that came from years of watching patterns form before they broke, that the evening was about to change. He was right about that too. The door of the drifting comet opened with a bang. Not a mechanical bang, but the kind that came from someone pushing it open harder than necessary because they wanted everyone in the room to know they had arrived. 5 Draken soldiers walked in. The bar changed the moment they entered. It was not that the noise stopped completely, it was that it shifted, dropping in volume the way the air pressure drops before a storm. Conversations continued, but quieter. Bodies turned slightly away. Eyes found other places to look. The instinct was universal across species. When predators entered a space, you made yourself small. The soldiers wore the black and red insignia of the Draken Empire's Border Patrol, a unit that operated in the disputed regions between Draken and Torvan territory. They were not the Draken Empire's finest soldiers. Border Patrol drew the ones who liked confrontation, who enjoyed the authority their uniforms gave them, who found peace boring and looked for reasons to break it. Their leader was a veteran named Vosk. He was enormous, even by the standards of a species that averaged 7 feet tall. His natural armor plating was thick and scarred from years of fighting, and one of his horns had been broken at the tip and had healed into a jagged point. He had small, deep-set eyes that never blinked fast enough, and a mouth that seemed built for snarling. He moved through the bar like he owned it, because in his mind, Vosk owned every room he was in until someone proved otherwise. No one ever proved otherwise. Vosk picked a table near the center of the room. He did not check if it was empty. It was not. 2 Torvan traders were sitting there, finishing a quiet meal. Vosk walked up to the table and stood over them. He did not say anything. He did not need to. This was how power worked in most of the galaxy. The strong spoke, and the rest listened, or they left. The humans did not leave. Danny had noticed the soldiers come in. He had tracked them with his eyes from the moment the door banged open. But he had not tensed up. He had not moved to the exit. He had simply watched them the way he watched most things, with a calm, steady attention that gave nothing away. Meg had noticed too. She had set down her drink and shifted her weight slightly, turning her body toward the open floor. Hank had stopped talking to his Torvan friend and was sitting very still, which for Hank was a warning sign that most species would not recognize until it was too late. But the humans did not start anything. They did not go looking for trouble. That was not how Danny ran his crew. He was not reckless, not in the way that people who did not know him might think. He understood risk. He understood the odds. He simply had a different threshold for what he was willing to accept. The trouble found them instead. Cody needed another drink. He slid out of the booth, patted Danny on the shoulder as he passed, and walked toward the bar. The path took him past the soldiers' table. He was not trying to make a point. He was not trying to provoke anyone. He was just a 22-year-old kid who wanted another Black Void because the first 3 had made his lips numb in a way he found interesting. He was 2 steps past the table when one of the Draken soldiers stuck out a clawed foot and tripped him. Cody stumbled forward, caught himself on the edge of the bar with both hands, and nearly went down. His drink order died in his throat. His palms stung from the impact. Behind him, the soldiers laughed. It was a deep, rumbling sound, the Draken version of cruelty given voice, and it carried across the entire bar. Every other species in the room would have done the same thing in that moment. They would have gotten up, brushed themselves off, and walked away. The Torvan would have submitted to the display of dominance, because their culture taught that patience outlasted aggression. The Velhari would have calculated the physical mismatch, concluded that engagement was statistically inadvisable, and withdrawn. Even other Draken, if they were lower ranked, would have accepted the humiliation and moved on, because that was how hierarchy worked. Cody turned around. He looked at the soldier who had tripped him. The Draken was grinning, all teeth, a row of sharp points set in a jaw that could bite through metal cable. He was sitting down, and still nearly at Cody's eye level. His arms were as thick as Cody's torso. His claws gleamed dull yellow under the bar lights. Cody was 5'10", 170 pounds. He had been in exactly 2 fights in his life, both in flight school, and he had lost one of them. He had no armor, no claws, no fangs, no venom, no natural weapons of any kind. He had soft skin that bruised easily, bones that broke under moderate pressure, and a cardiovascular system that could be stopped by a single hard blow to the chest. He looked the Draken soldier in the eye and said, "You want to try that again, big guy?" The bar went silent. Not quiet, silent. Every conversation stopped. Every glass paused halfway to every mouth. Every eye in the room turned toward the young human standing in front of the Draken table with his fists at his sides and his chin up and absolutely no backup plan. Wraith's breath caught. His recording device was running. He leaned forward without realizing it and whispered into his sleeve. The juvenile human has just issued a direct challenge to a Draken border soldier. He is outmassed by approximately 300 pounds. He has no visible weapons. His heart rate, based on the flush of his skin, is elevated, but he shows no signs of retreat behavior. I do not know what I am witnessing. Vosk looked up from his drink. He studied Cody the way a large predator studies something small that has wandered too close. There was no anger in his expression, not yet. There was just a kind of lazy amusement, the look of a being who had been given an unexpected entertainment. He set his glass down slowly. "What did you say, little thing?" Vosk asked. His common tongue was rough, the words thick with accent, but the meaning was clear. Cody did not step back. "I said, do you want to try that again?" Vosk stood up. The chair scraped back. The table shuddered. He rose to his full height, and he kept rising, unfolding like something built for war. 7 feet 4 inches of armored muscle and bad intentions, scarred from 100 fights, and looking down at a human boy, like gravity looking down at something that had forgotten it was supposed to fall. Behind Vosk, his 4 soldiers rose too. They spread out slightly, a practiced formation, shoulders back, claws flexed. 5 Draken Border Patrol veterans, each one capable of tearing through a pressurized bulkhead with their bare hands. And from the back of the bar, from the booth by the wall, came a voice. "Hey, kid, you good?" Danny Cole, calm, steady, not loud, but carrying across the silence like a stone across still water. Cody did not look away from Vosk. "Yeah, Cap, I'm good." Danny set down his glass. He stood up. He rolled his shoulders, a small, loose movement that popped something in his neck. He did not hurry. He did not tense up. He moved with the slow, deliberate ease of a man who had made a decision and was now simply walking toward the consequences. Beside him, Meg cracked her knuckles, one hand at a time, methodical, like she was checking off items on a list. Hank pushed his chair back. The screech of metal on metal made half the bar flinch. Pete set his glass down with a quiet clink that somehow sounded louder than everything else in the room. Lori sighed the way she always sighed when she knew she was about to have patience, finished her drink in one pull, and rolled up her sleeves. Danny walked across the bar. He moved past tables that had cleared. He stepped around overturned chairs. He came to a stop beside Cody, and together they stood in front of Vosk. 2 humans, 5 Draken. The math was not complicated. The math was terrible. Danny looked up. He had to look up a long way. Vosk was nearly 2 feet taller than him, and probably 4 times his weight, and every inch of him was built for killing things smaller than himself, which was almost everything. Danny smiled. "Evening," he said. "I think your buddy there tripped my pilot. Accidents happen, but if it was not an accident, we might have a little problem." Vosk stared down at him. There was something in the Draken's expression that was not quite surprise and not quite confusion, but something close to both. He had fought many species, he had intimidated many species, but he had never had a creature this small and this breakable stand in front of him with a smile on its face and call a confrontation with 5 Draken soldiers a little problem. "You threaten me, little human?" Vosk said. "You are soft. You are small. Your bones would snap like dry sticks in my hands." He thought about it for a second, genuinely considered the statement, and then he said something that Wraith would write down word for word and would read back to himself many times in the years to come, trying to understand it, never quite succeeding. "Yeah, probably," Danny said. "But here is the thing about humans, friend. We do not really factor that into the decision." Behind him, his crew lined up. Meg on his left, Hank on his right, Pete and Lori behind them. 6 humans in a row, soft and small and breakable, standing in front of 5 armored predators in a bar at the edge of civilized space. Vosk threw the first punch. It came down from above, a massive overhead strike with a fist the size of a small engine block, driven by 300 pounds of Draken muscle and a lifetime of fights that had always ended the same way. The fist moved fast, faster than something that big had any right to move, and it was aimed at the top of Danny Cole's skull with enough force to crack stone. Danny ducked, not cleanly, not with the elegant precision of a Torvan martial artist or the calculated timing of a Velhari defense drone. He ducked the way a human ducks, with a sharp, ugly twist of his body that threw him sideways, just far enough. The fist passed his ear close enough to ruffle his hair. It kept going, and hit the bar counter behind him, and a chunk of the countertop broke off and skittered across the floor like shrapnel. He was not used to missing. And then Hank Dunn hit him in the ribs with a bar stool. The stool was metal, bolted to a heavy base, and Hank had ripped it from the floor, with a strength that came from adrenaline and stubbornness more than raw muscle. He swung it like a bat. It connected with the gap between 2 sections of Vosk's chest plating, with a deep ringing clang that echoed through the bar like a bell. Vosk staggered. 1 step, just one. But for a Draken Border Patrol commander, 1 step was a shock. And then the bar erupted. Everything happened at once. The 4 remaining Draken soldiers surged forward. Chairs flew, tables overturned, glasses shattered. The other patrons scrambled for cover, diving behind the bar, pressing against the walls, fighting for the exit. Sisk the bartender pulled a heavy metal shutter down over the top shelf of bottles, with the practiced speed of someone who had done this many times before. Danny went after Vosk. This was not bravery in any tactical sense. It was necessity. Vosk was the biggest, the strongest, and the most dangerous. If someone did not keep him busy, he would tear through the rest of the crew like paper. So Danny put himself in front of the Draken commander and did the only thing he could do. He kept moving. He could not match Vosk's strength. He was not foolish enough to try. What he could do was stay close, stay fast, and make himself the most annoying target Vosk had ever tried to hit. He ducked under swings. He sidestepped lunges. He threw things, anything within reach, a glass, a plate, a handful of some unidentifiable bar snack that scattered across Vosk's face and made him snarl with irritation rather than pain. Danny kept talking the entire time, a steady stream of commentary that served no tactical purpose except to make Vosk angrier, and anger made Vosk swing wider, and wider swings were easier to dodge. "Too high," Danny said, leaning under a haymaker. "Little to the left," he added, spinning away from a grab. "Almost had me that time, big guy. Keep trying." Vosk roared. The sound shook the glasses on every table in the bar. He swung again, a backhand that would have sent Danny through a wall, but Danny dropped flat, slid under it on the wet floor, and popped up behind Vosk to land a quick, hard punch to the spot just below the base of the skull, where the armor plating was thinnest. Vosk felt it. Not much, but he felt it. Across the room, Meg Lawson was fighting two soldiers at once. She had not waited for them to come to her. She had gone to them. The moment the fight started, she had grabbed a bottle from the nearest table, broken it against the edge, and met the first soldier with a slash across the soft tissue under his chin. The Draken howled and swiped at her with claws that could cut steel. Meg threw herself sideways, rolled over a table, came up on the other side, and kicked the second soldier in the knee joint. Draken knees bent the same direction as human knees, and they had the same weakness. The joint buckled. The soldier dropped to one leg. Meg hit him in the face with the broken bottle. The first soldier recovered and caught Meg with a backhand that launched her into a table 6 feet away. She hit it hard. The table collapsed under her. She lay there for almost 2 seconds, which was long enough for the watching aliens to assume she was finished. Then she stood up, spit blood onto the floor, wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, and smiled the kind of smile that had nothing to do with happiness and everything to do with the fact that something inside Meg Lawson got brighter the harder things got. She went back in. Hank was in the center of the room, locked in a wrestling match with the largest of the remaining soldiers, a Draken who had at least 150 pounds on him. Hank could not overpower him, he knew that. But Hank had grown up on a colony world where the gravity was 20% higher than Earth standard, and he had been throwing around heavy equipment since he was 14 years old. He knew how to use leverage. He had gotten both arms around the Draken's right arm and locked his hands together. And now he hung on like something that had decided it was never letting go. Every time the Draken tried to swing his free arm, Hank's weight pulled him off balance. The soldier thrashed and snarled and tried to slam Hank into the wall, and he partially succeeded, cracking Hank's shoulder against a support beam hard enough to leave a dent in the metal. But Hank did not let go. His face was red. His teeth were clenched. A lesser grip would have failed 10 seconds ago. Hank's grip did not fail, because Hank had decided it would not, and that was apparently all the justification his body needed. Pete Garza fought the way he did everything, quietly and with precision. He had somehow gotten behind the fifth soldier during the initial chaos, and now he was methodically targeting specific points on the Draken's body. He had read a xenobiology manual once, 3 years ago, because the crew's medical library had limited entertainment options on long hauls. He knew where the nerve clusters sat beneath Draken armor plating, and he knew that a hard, focused strike to the right spot could temporarily disable a limb. He hit the soldier in the back of the left shoulder, right between 2 armor plates, with the rigid edge of his hand. The soldier's left arm went dead. It dropped to his side like a piece of rope. The Draken spun around, confused and furious, swinging his remaining arm. Pete was already gone, moving to the other side, calm as a man fixing an engine. Cody was in the thick of it. He did not have Danny's experience, or Meg's ferocity, or Hank's strength, or Pete's precision. What he had was 22 years of energy, and the kind of stubborn refusal to quit that older humans recognized as either their greatest strength or their most endearing flaw. He dodged when he could. He took hits when he could not. He threw punches that probably hurt his hands more than they hurt Drake in armor. And he kept getting up. Every time he went down, he got up. A claw caught his arm and opened a gash from elbow to wrist. He got up. A kick sent him crashing into the bar. He got up. He was bleeding from 4 places and grinning like an idiot, and he would not stop. And then there was Lori. Lori Briggs was a medic. She had taken an oath to heal. She had gentle hands and a kind voice, and she had once cried over a stray animal she found on a supply run. She was not a fighter. She had never been a fighter. She did not want to be a fighter. But one of the Draken soldiers broke free from Pete and went straight for Cody, claws raised, aiming for the kid's throat. And Lori saw it happen. She was standing by the bar. There was a metal serving tray on the counter next to her. It was oval, heavy, about 3 pounds of solid alloy. Lori picked up the tray, crossed the distance in 3 fast steps, and swung it into the side of the Draken soldier's head with every ounce of strength her body could produce. The tray connected with the flat of his skull just behind the ear hole. The impact was so hard, the tray bent almost in half. The soldier's head snapped sideways. His knees buckled. He went down. Lori stood over him, breathing hard, holding the bent tray, and said in a voice that shook only a little, "Nobody touches my crew." Wraith was behind an overturned table in the far corner. His hands were trembling. His recording device was capturing everything. He was composing his notes in real time, his Valhari mind processing observations faster than any human could think, and still he could not keep up with what he was seeing. He whispered into his recorder, "They are losing. By every measurement, they are losing. They are outmassed. They are outarmed. 2 of them are bleeding from visible wounds. The one called Meg is favoring her left side in a pattern consistent with fractured ribs. The young one has a deep laceration on his right arm, and they have not stopped. They have not retreated. They have not slowed down. They are fighting as though the concept of losing is something that happens to other species, but not to them. I have studied conflict behavior in 11 species. I have never seen anything like this." The fight had been going for 3 minutes. In bar fight terms, that was an eternity. Danny was tiring. He was human. He had human lungs and human muscles and a human heart that could only pump so fast for so long. His dodges were getting slower. His breathing was getting heavier. Vosk was bleeding from a dozen small wounds, none of them serious, all of them adding up to a growing, grinding frustration. Vosk lunged. Danny sidestepped, but not fast enough. A claw caught his side and ripped through his jacket and the skin beneath it. Danny grunted and stumbled. Vosk pressed forward, reaching for him. Danny did something stupid. Danny did something human. Instead of retreating, instead of creating distance, he stepped into Vosk's reach. He feinted high, jerking his head like he was going for a headbutt. Vosk flinched back, just an inch, just a fraction of a second. And Danny dropped low and drove his knee into the Draken's inner thigh joint, the one spot on a Draken body where the armor plating did not fully close. Vosk's leg buckled. He dropped to one knee with a crash that shook the floor. Danny grabbed a heavy metal mug from the bar counter, swung it in a wide arc, and brought it down on the side of Vosk's head. The sound was like a bell tolling in a church. Vosk went down to both knees, his vision blurred. He braced himself on one hand, claws scraping the floor, and looked up at the human standing over him. Danny Cole was a mess. Blood ran from a gash on his side. One eye was swelling shut. His knuckles were split open. His breathing came in ragged pulls. He looked like something that had been put through a machine designed to break things. He was still standing. "We done here?" Danny said. He had to pause to breathe between words. "Because I would really like to finish my drink." The bar was silent for the second time that night. Every eye in the room was on the two of them. A battered, bleeding human standing over a kneeling Draken commander. It was an image that did not make sense. It was an image that was not supposed to be possible. Vosk stared up at Danny. Something moved behind his eyes, something deep and old, something that lived in a part of the Draken mind that was older than language. The Draken did not have a word for what it was, because they had never needed one. The closest translation would be something like recognition, the sudden, uncomfortable understanding that the creature in front of you is something you have never encountered before and do not know how to classify. Vosk breathed out. He pulled himself up, slow and heavy, until he was standing again. He looked down at Danny, and Danny looked up at him, and neither of them moved. Then Vosk nodded. The silence lasted about 10 seconds. Then Danny Cole sat down on the nearest stool that was still in one piece, pressed his hand against the gash on his side, and said, "Sisk, can we get another round? For everybody." The bartenders stared at him. 4 arms, no expression, and yet somehow radiating total disbelief. Then Sisk reached behind the counter, pulled out glasses, and started pouring. The bar came back to life, slowly, the way a room breathes again after a window has been opened. Patrons crept out from behind tables. Conversations restarted in low, uncertain tones. Someone righted a chair. Someone else began sweeping glass. The drifting comet had survived worse nights. And it would survive this one, though the dent in the bar counter where Vosk's fist had landed would become something of a local landmark in the weeks that followed. Lori went to work. She pulled her medkit from the bag she had left at the booth. The bag she always carried because she had learned early in her career that humans were a species that required frequent medical attention. She started with Cody, because Cody was bleeding the most, and because she had a particular softness for the kid that she would have denied if anyone had asked, but that everyone on the crew knew about. The gash on his arm was deep but clean. She sealed it with surgical adhesive, applied a pressure bandage, and told him he was going to have a scar. Cody looked at the bandage, and then looked up at her with an expression of such genuine pride that Lori had to turn away so he would not see her trying not to laugh. His side was torn up, but the wound was shallow, more skin than muscle. She cleaned it, sealed it, and told him he needed to stop getting into fights with things bigger than him. Danny said he would take that under advisement. They both knew he would not. Meg had 2 cracked ribs. Lori taped them, gave her a mild painkiller from the kit, and told her to take it easy. Meg said she would take it easy when she was dead. Lori did not argue because she had been on this crew long enough to know that arguing with Meg about rest was like arguing with a wall about being a wall. Hank had a dislocated shoulder from being slammed into the support beam. Pete helped Lori pop it back into place. Hank made a sound that he would later deny making, and then he rotated his arm in a slow circle and declared himself fine. Pete had bruised knuckles and a cut above his eyebrow. He cleaned and bandaged it himself while Lori was busy, because Pete did not like to be a bother. When the crew was patched up, Lori did something that made every alien in the bar stop and stare. She picked up her medkit, walked across the floor, stepped over broken glass and spilled drinks, and the wreckage of what had been a fairly nice table, and stopped in front of Vosk's soldiers. "Anyone need patching up?" she asked. The Draken soldiers looked at her. They looked at each other. They looked at Vosk. In Draken culture, you did not heal your enemies. The concept was not just unusual, it was incomprehensible. An enemy was an enemy. You fought them, you beat them, or they beat you. When it was over, you went your separate ways, and you dealt with your own wounds. The idea that the creature who had just hit one of your squad members in the head with a serving tray would then offer to bandage the resulting injury did not fit into any framework the Draken had built over 10,000 years of civilization. Vosk said nothing. He just watched. One of the soldiers, the one whose left arm Pete had disabled, looked down at his limb, and then looked at Lori. He extended the arm toward her, slowly, like he was not quite sure what would happen. Lori took his hand, felt along the nerve cluster, and applied a series of small, targeted pressure movements she had learned from that same xenobiology manual Pete had read. Feeling returned to the arm in stages. The soldier flexed his fingers one at a time, watching them move with an expression close to wonder. He said something in Draken that Lori did not understand. The translator in her earpiece rendered it roughly as, "You fix what your packmate broke." That is sort of my whole job. She treated 3 of the 5 soldiers. She cleaned cuts, applied ointment to a burn one of them had gotten from a shattered heat lamp during the fight, and checked the one she had hit with the tray for signs of concussion. He did not have one, because Draken's skulls were built to take far worse, but he flinched when she touched the bruise, and Lori apologized. She apologized to the soldier who had tried to claw Cody's throat open, because he flinched. Wraith, watching from behind his overturned table, recorded, "This human medic is treating the enemy wounded. She does this with the same care and attention she showed her own crew. There is no strategic motive that I can identify. She is not leveraging this for a political advantage. She is not performing for an audience. She is doing it because one of them is hurt, and she knows how to help. This is the most alien thing I have witnessed in 9 years of xenological study." Danny's round arrived. Sisk carried the drinks out himself, all 4 arms loaded with glasses. He served the humans first, then made his way across the room, and then, with visible hesitation, set a glass in front of Vosk. Vosk looked at the drink. He looked at Danny across the room. The human captain raised his glass in a gesture that was either a toast or a challenge or both, and his swollen eye made the gesture look lopsided and faintly ridiculous. Vosk picked up the glass and drank it in one long pull. He set it down, and the ghost of something crossed his face. Not a smile, because Draken did not smile the way humans did, but a loosening, a release of tension, an acknowledgement that something had changed, and he had not yet decided how he felt about it. "You are insane, human," Vosk said. "Yeah, we get that a lot." The night continued. Against every rational expectation, it continued as though the fight had been nothing more than a brief interruption, like a thunderstorm that passes and leaves the air cleaner than before. Hank found his way over to the soldier he had been wrestling. They compared scars. Hank showed a long white line on his forearm from a cargo accident. The Draken showed a set of claw marks across his shoulder from a border skirmish. They nodded at each other with the quiet respect of beings who understood that the body keeps a record of every hard thing you have survived. Cody was sitting with one of Vosk's younger soldiers, teaching him a card game. The Draken did not fully understand the rules, but he was trying, turning the cards over with claws that could have cut through the table, squinting at the symbols with an intensity that suggested he was taking this more seriously than he had taken the fight. Pete and the soldier whose arm he had disabled were having a conversation about nerve cluster anatomy. The Draken was fascinated that a human had memorized his species' weak points from a book. Pete explained that he read a lot on long trips. The Draken said that in his culture, knowing an enemy's weaknesses was a sign of respect. Pete thought about this and decided he liked that interpretation. Meg was at the bar with a bag of ice pressed against her ribs, negotiating with Sisk for a discount on their next round. She argued that since the fight had technically been started by the Draken, and since the humans had not initiated the property damage, they should not be held financially responsible for the broken tables. Sisk listened with the patience of a being who had heard 1,000 excuses and found none of them convincing. But he gave her 10% off anyway, because Meg was the kind of person you gave 10% off to if you wanted her to stop talking. Danny and Vosk sat at opposite ends of the bar. They did not talk much. They did not need to. There was a language between them now that had been written in bruises and blood, and the simple fact that neither of them had backed down. And that language did not require words. At one point, Vosk turned to Danny and said, "Your young one, the pilot. He challenged me." Danny nodded. "He did. He is small. He could not have won." "Probably not." "Then why did he do it?" Danny thought about it. He took a drink. He set the glass down and looked at Vosk with his one good eye. "Because somebody tripped him, and he thought that was wrong. That is pretty much the whole calculation." Vosk was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "My soldiers will not trouble your crew again." "I appreciate that," Danny said. "This is not because I fear you. I know. It is because I do not understand you, and in my experience, the things you do not understand are the things that kill you." Danny laughed, and it was a real laugh, warm and tired and a little bit sad. "That might be the nicest thing anyone has ever said about my species." Rafe left the bar 3 hours later. His recording device was full. His glass of water sat untouched on the table where he had left it. His clothes were dusty from crouching behind overturned furniture. He walked back to his quarters on the upper ring in silence, passing through the clean, bright corridors of the Velhari section of the station, where everything was orderly and logical and precisely arranged, and none of it felt as real as the broken, bloody, beautiful chaos he had just witnessed. He sat at his desk. He opened his report file. He stared at the blank page for a long time. He had been doing this for 9 years. 47 reports, 6 conferences, 11 species classified before humans. He was one of the most respected xenologists in the Velhari collective, and he could not write a conclusion. He tried. He applied the standard military threat matrix, and it told him humans were a negligible physical threat. He applied the behavioral prediction model, and it produced results with such wide error margins that the model itself flagged the output as unreliable. He applied the sociological integration framework, and it told him humans were either the most adaptive social species in recorded history, or the most delusional, and it could not determine which. He deleted everything. He started again. He deleted that too. He leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes, and thought about what he had seen. He thought about Danny Cole standing in front of a creature that could have killed him with one hand, and smiling. He thought about Meg Lawson getting hit so hard she broke a table, and getting up 2 seconds later with blood on her teeth and fire in her eyes. He thought about Cody Bell, 22 years old and 170 pounds, looking up at a Draken veteran and refusing to look away. He thought about Lori Briggs, hitting a soldier with a tray and then apologizing for the bruise. He thought about Pete reading anatomy books for fun. He thought about Hank comparing scars with the creature he had been trying to choke out an hour earlier. He opened his report one more time, and he began to write. Preliminary Field Report, Human Behavioral Analysis, Velhari Station Incident, 4471. Subject Species, Homo sapiens. Terran Classification. Common Designation, Humans. Observation Summary. The human crew of the vessel Daisy May engaged in an unprovoked physical confrontation with a squad of Draken border soldiers. The humans were outmatched in every measurable category. By all rational projections, they should have been incapacitated within 30 seconds. They were not. They did not fight to establish dominance. They did not fight to protect territory. They did not fight according to calculated advantage. They fought because one of their group was disrespected, and the rest of them simply decided that this was not acceptable. They fought injured. They fought outmatched. They fought with improvised weapons, borrowed knowledge, and an emotional intensity that defies clinical classification. And when it was over, when they had somehow fought the Draken to a standstill, They bought their opponents drinks and treated their wounds. I have spent 9 years studying this species. I have filed 47 reports. I have attended 6 interspecies behavioral conferences. I am no closer to a definitive classification than I was on day 1. What I can say is this. Humans are not the strongest species in the galaxy. They are not the smartest, the fastest, or the most durable. But they possess something that I have not found in any other species across all my years of study. An absolute, irrational, magnificent refusal to stay down. They do not calculate their odds before they act. They do not weigh their survival against the cost of standing up. They simply decide what matters to them. A crewmate, a principal, a stranger they met an hour ago, and they commit to it with everything they have. This makes them unpredictable. This makes them dangerous. And if I am being honest in a way that will probably get this report reviewed by my supervisors, this makes them extraordinary. Revised classification recommendation: do not provoke the humans. Not because they will win, but because they will fight you anyway. And somehow, against every rational expectation, they will make you respect them for it. End report. Wraith saved the file. He leaned back. He thought about Danny Cole walking into a bar like he owned it, bleeding like he was falling apart, and grinning like the whole universe was just one long, beautiful, ridiculous ride that he was grateful to be on. He did not understand humans. He had spent 9 years trying. He had built models and frameworks and theories, and none of them held. None of them captured the thing that made humans different, the thing that made them terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. He was starting to think that maybe he was not supposed to understand. Maybe that was the point. Maybe the thing that made humans extraordinary was the same thing that made them impossible to classify. They did not make sense. They were not logical. They were not optimal. They were not built for the universe they lived in. And they did not care. They just kept going, kept reaching out, kept standing up, kept laughing at things that should have broken them. The freighter came in slow, like it was in no rush to be anywhere. It was an old ship, the kind that had been patched and welded so many times that it looked more like a scar than a vessel. The name painted on its side read Daisy May, and beneath the name, someone had drawn a small cartoon flower with a wrench through it. No one on Velhari Station had ever seen a ship decorated like that. Most species did not see the point. The docking clamps locked with a heavy thud, and the airlock hissed open, and out walked 6 humans. Danny Cole came first. He was the captain, a tall man with a loose walk and a face that always seemed to be halfway to a grin. He had brown hair that he never quite kept neat, a jaw that had clearly been broken at least once, and a pair of boots so worn down that the left sole flapped a little when he walked. He stepped onto the station deck, looked around at the massive alien trade hub stretching out in every direction, and let out a long whistle. "Nice place," he said to no one in particular. Behind him came Meg Lawson, his second in command. She was shorter than Danny by a good 6 inches, with red hair tied back tight, and a look on her face that said she had already found 3 things wrong with the station, and was keeping a list. She carried a datapad in one hand, and a thermos of coffee in the other, and she did not look impressed by anything. Then came the rest. Pete Garza, the engineer, a quiet man with dark eyes and grease stains on his hands that seemed permanent. Lori Briggs, the medic, a blonde woman with a warm smile, who waved at a group of startled alien dock workers as she passed. Hank Dunn, the gunner, who was built like a wall and had the kind of face that made people cross the street. And finally, Cody Bell, the pilot, barely 22, with messy hair and wide eyes that made him look like he was seeing everything for the first time, which in many ways he was. They walked through the docking corridor and into the main commerce ring of Velhari Station, and every alien they passed stopped to stare. This was not unusual. Humans always drew stares. Velhari Station sat in neutral space, floating at the junction of 3 great civilizations. The Velhari Collective controlled the station itself. They were tall, thin beings with silver skin and large dark eyes, and they had three-lobed brains that could process information faster than any computer humans had ever built. They were calm, logical, and deeply suspicious of anything they could not immediately understand. The Draken Empire held the territory to the galactic east. They were massive reptilian creatures, 7 to 8 feet tall, with thick natural armor plating across their bodies, and claws that could tear through ship hull metal. They valued strength above all things. Their culture was built on dominance, hierarchy, and the firm belief that the universe belonged to whoever was strong enough to take it. The Torvan Alliance held the West. They were slender, graceful beings with iridescent skin that shifted color with their moods. They lived for over 1,000 standard cycles and moved through the world with a patience that bordered on arrogance. They believed that time was the ultimate weapon, and that all problems, if you waited long enough, would solve themselves. And then there were the humans. Humans had stumbled onto the galactic stage about 40 years ago, when a mining ship from the outer colonies had accidentally punched a hole through a Velhari scanning perimeter, and nearly caused an interstellar incident. Since then, humanity had spread across a small but growing patch of space, trading, exploring, and generally confusing everyone they came into contact with. The galactic consensus on humans was not flattering. They were soft, fragile, short-lived, emotionally volatile, and seemed to operate on a decision-making process that no species had been able to map or predict. They formed attachments to everything. They laughed at danger. They named their ships after flowers and dead pets and old jokes. They were, by every rational measure, not a species that should have survived long enough to leave their own planet, let alone colonize others. And yet here they were, grinning. Danny led his crew through the commerce ring like he had been here 100 times, even though this was his first visit. He stopped at a Velhari supply vendor and struck up a conversation about fuel cell prices with the easy confidence of a man buying bread from a corner shop. The vendor, a thin Velhari with 6 fingers on each hand, seemed uncertain how to respond to this level of friendliness from a customer. Meg stepped in and began to haggle. She was not aggressive about it. She was just relentless. She smiled. She reasoned. She compared prices from 3 other stations. She mentioned a cousin who worked in fuel distribution. None of this was true, but she said it with such steady conviction that the vendor eventually dropped the price by 30% just to make the conversation stop. Lori wandered over to a Draken merchant selling preserved meats and told him his scales had a lovely color. The merchant, a creature who could have torn her in half without much effort, turned a shade darker across the neck, which was the Draken equivalent of blushing, and gave her a free sample. Hank found a bench and sat down, content to watch the crowd. Pete found a maintenance panel on a nearby wall and began examining it with quiet professional interest. Cody stood in the middle of the concourse, turning in a slow circle, taking it all in with the open wonder of someone who still believed the universe was the most exciting thing that had ever happened to him. None of them noticed the Velhari watching from across the trading floor. His name was Counselor Wraith. He was old, even by Velhari standards, with silver skin that had faded to a dull gray at the temples, and eyes that had seen enough of the galaxy to fill several lifetimes. He was a senior member of the Velhari Observation Corps, the division responsible for studying new species and assessing how much of a threat they were. He had been assigned to humans 9 years ago. He had not yet filed a definitive conclusion. This was embarrassing. Wraith had classified 11 species before humans. He had written the definitive threat assessment for the Corps, a hive-mind insectoid race from the Outer Rim. He had mapped the behavioral patterns of the Silween, a species that communicated entirely through bioelectric pulses. He was one of the most respected xenologists in the collective. And humans made him feel like he was starting from scratch every single day. He watched Danny laugh with the fuel vendor. He watched Meg negotiate with the calm precision of a general planning a siege. He watched Laurie charm a Draken. He watched Cody stare at the station ceiling, with his mouth slightly open. He pulled out his datapad and began to type. Day 3217 of human observation. The crew of the vessel Daisy May arrived at Velhari Station today. 6 members. Mixed age, mixed function. Initial behavioral patterns consistent with prior observations. The humans are friendly. They engage with other species as though social barriers do not exist, or as though they have simply decided that such barriers are optional. The crew has been on station for less than 1 standard hour, and has already made more social connections than most Draken trade delegations make in a week. I remain unable to determine whether this is a calculated strategy or simply how they are. I will continue observation tonight. They appear to be heading toward the lower entertainment ring. This is likely to be informative, or catastrophic. With humans, I have learned, these are often the same thing. He saved the entry, tucked the datapad into his sleeve, and followed them at a careful distance. The humans walked down the corridor in a loose group, talking over each other, laughing at things Wraith could not hear, bumping shoulders in a way that seemed to communicate something he could not decode. Danny had his arm around Cody's shoulders. Meg was telling Pete something that made him shake his head and almost smile. Laurie was humming. Hank cracked his knuckles and asked if anyone knew a good bar. Danny grinned and said he could smell one. Wraith made a note. The captain claims to be able to detect drinking establishments through olfactory senses. This is almost certainly not true. And yet somehow, I do not doubt he will find one. He was right. Danny found one within 10 minutes.